Hello everyone. In this video, we will see how to create a Lambda function using C# in .NET. And as you know, we can pass different parameters to a function and then we can return any type of data from a function. So in this example, we will pass an object to this function and then we will return an object from this function. Okay, I'm already logged into AWS Console. And I am here on AWS Lambda function page. So to get here, if you don't know, you can type here in the search bar Lambda and you will get the link. Simply click the link and you will land here on AWS Lambda main page, and then you need to click on functions. Okay, let's create a function first. So to create a function, we can use blueprints. Some sample functions are already defined there, but I'm going to select author from scratch because I'm going to create a new function and then we name it. Let's say we name it my function, and then we need to select runtime. Okay, here is the problem that if we select Node.js or we select Python, then we can write the code here. But if we select .NET, we have no option to write the code in the console. Anyway, we select .NET and here I'm going to select .NET 6, architecture x86, 64, and here are some default execution rules. This first option is already selected, so you just leave it as it is. And it will create a new role with basic Lambda permissions. And then in advanced settings, no need to change anything. We will discuss this later in our next topic. And now we click create function. Will take some time. And it has created a new function. And now if we scroll down a little, you can see here in the code section that the code editor doesn't support .NET 6. As I told you earlier that the core editor support is not available for .NET. Anyway, we can test this function. It is a simple function which will return a message. So we just need to click test. It executed and this is the result. Status code 200 and hello from Lambda. And because we don't have the option to edit this code, so we will need an IDE, like we can use Visual Studio to edit the code, or we can create a function there and then we will deploy it here and then we will test it. So I'm going to delete this function because we don't need it. Select it and then in the actions you can delete the function. Here you need to type delete just for the confirmation and then click delete. Now close this, and as you can see, we have no any function in here. Okay, let's start Visual Studio. And here I'm going to select continue without code. Okay, in Visual Studio, first we need to install an extension. So we will go here, extensions, then manage extensions, and then we will type here AWS Toolkit. And here we get AWS Toolkit for Visual Studio 2022. So download it. Okay, it has downloaded it, but it will install when we close this Visual Studio. So we close it. And it is now installing it. Okay, so our toolkit has been installed. We can close it and we start Visual Studio again. And this time we select create a new project. In here C# is already selected. From here we will select AWS. And from here we will select serverless, or we can select all project types. And here we need to select AWS Lambda project. So click it and then next. Project name AWS Lambda functions. You can select the location where you want to save, but I will leave it as it is and then I will click create. And in here some sample functions are already defined, but I will select empty function and then finish. Okay, let's close this starting page and what's new, and also these information bars. And now in the Solution Explorer, function.cs. So in this function class, this function handler is basically our Lambda function. And this class, function class, it is like a program class in our .NET application. And this function handler is something like main function in our program class if you already have worked on .NET applications. So this is basically our entry point. When we call a Lambda function, it will start from here. Okay, let's first remove all these comments. And now in the code you can see that in this function we are just passing a string parameter, that is input, and what it is doing, it is converting it to uppercase and then returning it. So that's it. It is a simple function. And one more thing, if you notice here, the namespace AWS Lambda functions, I don't know why it used semicolon. It should use curly braces like this and then put all this in the body of this namespace. Okay, now in this function, instead of this string parameter, we need to pass an object of a class. So first we define a class here, public class, let's say customer. And then we define some properties, customer ID, customer name, and some other properties as well. Okay, now let's change this property to GUID and also nullable. The same way, the datetime property nullable. So now if we want to pass this class as a parameter here, what we do, we write like customer and then variable name customer. But in this case, we are not going to do this because we will need to define a trigger to invoke this function, and we will define an API trigger. And for that, we will use API Gateway proxy request class. So for that, first we go to NuGet package manager, and here we will install Amazon Lambda API Gateway events. So select this and then click install. Apply. And we also need to add one more package here, newtonsoft.json. So select this one and install. Apply. Okay, now it has also installed, and you notice the error here input because we don't have this input parameter here anymore. So we just remove this line. Okay, now here on the top, I'm going to use some namespaces. One is system and then amazon.lambda.api gateway events and using newtonsoft.json. Okay, and now in here we will use API gateway proxy request and variable name request. And the return type of this function, we will also use API gateway proxy request. This is because when we get some information from an API endpoint, then there is not only the object what we pass it, but also some other information like headers and some other properties. And along with other properties in this class, we will also get our object what we pass it. Okay, now in our function, we will use here try catch block. So this is our try block and then catch. And in here, we will use JSON exception E. Okay, in try block, first we will get the body property from this request object and store it in customer class. So we write here customer variable customer is equal to request.body. But this body property is a string type, so we need to convert it to an object, and for that we will use JSON convert.deserialize object type customer and semicolon at the end. And now what it will do, it will take the body property and it will convert it to customer class object. And after that we write here customer.customer ID is equal to GUID.newGUID. And one more property, customer.registration date is equal to datetime.now. And after that, we will return an object of API Gateway Proxy Response class. So return new API Gateway Proxy Response. And in that, okay, here we also need to use API Gateway Proxy Response, not request. Okay, so in this, first we return status code, which will be 200, and then body is equal to, and now in the body we need to pass this customer class object. So we need to serialize this, and for that we will use JSON convert dot serialize object, and in that customer. And after that we will return header. And header, you know, is it's a combination of key pair values. So we will use dictionary string. So in here we can pass multiple headers, but here we are passing only content type application JSON, and here semicolon at the end. And the same way, if there is an exception, we will return an object of API Gateway Proxy Response with status code, let's say 400, and body. The same way, JSON convert dot serialize object, and in that new error is equal to $, and error occurred while executing the function. And we bring this to new line. And here we use e.message, and then header, we copy this from here and paste it here, and at the end semicolon. And now what we will do, that we will pass this customer class object, but we will pass only these properties: customer name, email, contact number, city, and country. And other two properties, as you can see, these properties are nullable, so we will not pass these properties to this function. And in our function, first we will get the body from the request object, and we will assign it to customer class, and then we will generate a new ID, and we will assign it to customer ID property of this customer class, and also we will get the new date and time, and we will assign this to registration date. And after that we will return this customer object back in the response with status code 200 and with header content type application JSON. And in case if any error occurred, then we will return the status code 400, and in the body we will return this message, and error occurred while executing the function, and then the error itself. And after that the header, the same way, content type application JSON. Okay, now before we run it, we go to project properties, and here we need to check that the target framework is .NET 6. Sometimes this target framework is not selected here, so we need to select it. And the second thing is, in my case, I'm using Visual Studio 2022, and I have the support up to .NET 6. I haven't installed .NET Framework 8, or maybe 9 is also available, I'm not sure. So I have not installed that, so I need to select 6. If you already have installed .NET 8, then you can select .NET 8 from here. Anyway, close this, and now we test it. Okay, so there is no any error and it is running, and we can test it here. But to test here this function, it is a little tricky, and I show you how. First we create an object that we are going to pass to this function. So this is the object we will pass to this function. There are some properties: customer name, email, contact number, city, and country. But here if we select, because we are going to test the function through API endpoint, so we will select this option, API Gateway v2 HTTP API. So when I select this and I scroll it down here, you can see here in the body property, it is returning a message, and it is a string. Remember I told you that in this function, in this object, request object, in the body property, we get string value. So this is a string value here, and the object we pass it here, it should be a string type. So what we do, first we remove all the spaces here like this. Like this. And then the second thing is we need to replace these double quotation marks with slash quotation marks like this. So because this is a string value we are going to pass, and in the string value we cannot pass these values like in double quotes. So what we need to do, that we need to replace all these double quotation marks with slash quotation marks like this. So we go here, replace all double quotation marks with slash double quotation marks. So replace all, and now we get all this value, and in here in the body property we remove this message and we paste our value here. And now when I execute this function, I will get the response here. So let's test this. Okay, so the status code is 200, and this is the header, and then some other properties which the function is returning to us. Okay, so our function is working correctly, and now we are going to deploy this, and then we will define a trigger there in AWS Console, and we will test it there. So to deploy this function, first we need to create a connection, and then we can deploy. So in here in account settings, you see this security credentials. We need to click it, and then we land on this page, my security credentials. Okay, now scroll it down here and you will see access keys options. So here we will create an access key, and we will use it here in our Visual Studio to connect it to AWS Lambda functions. Okay, so create access key, and here we need to select an option that for what we are going to use this key. There are different options, but I'm going to select this local code because I'm going to use this key in the local environment on my development machine, and then I will deploy it here on AWS. So I've selected this local code, and there are some other ways we can connect our Visual Studio to this AWS, and in the next video we will also see that how we can connect our IDE or Visual Studio by making some users and assigning them some roles. So we can also do that. That's why it is showing us alternative recommended. So we will also see that in the next video. But currently I'm going to use this access key. So I understand the above recommendation and then click next. Okay, here we need to describe that how we are going to use this key. This is optional, but it is better if you define that how we are going to use this key. So I will write here to connect Visual Studio to AWS Lambda functions, and then we create this key. So a key has been created here, and now we will use this key in our Visual Studio to connect it to AWS. So in Visual Studio, first click on View, and here you will see the option AWS Explorer. So click this and it will open this window, and here we need to provide the key. So we click this user icon with plus sign. Okay, now from here I need to select IAM user role, and then I need to provide a profile name. I will type here default. You can name it whatever you want, but this default is already defined in the configuration file, so I'll use it, and if I change it to something else, then I also need to define it there. Anyway, I'm going to use default, and then I need to provide here the access key ID, and I copy this from here and provide it here, and then I need to provide secret key, and this is the secret key. We can show it here like this. And one more thing, that this is gonna show us this key once, and after that we cannot see this key, so we can store it somewhere safe, and after that we can recreate the key and we can use that key, but we cannot see this one. Okay, so I copy this and I paste it here, and from here profile region partition AWS standard, it is okay, but in the region, so I need to select from here Stockholm. And why I show you here, because when we go here on Lambda functions, we see here Stockholm. So I'm going to use this same Stockholm here and then click add. Okay, so it is now connected to AWS, and you see here there is no any function defined. If there are some functions, it will show an arrow like this. And also there are no functions here. So now we are going to deploy this function, and it will show up here and also here. So right click on it, and then you see the option publish to AWS Lambda. Okay, profile default, region Stockholm, Lambda runtime, we need to select .NET 6, architecture x86, and here name of the function. So we name it add customer, and then description for testing purpose only, and then click next. In the roles here, I will select AWS Lambda role default policy. And the error you see here, SQS queues, this is just because I'm logged in with a user account, not the root account, and I don't have some permissions. And because of this, it is showing this error. If you have these permissions or you are logged in with a root account, you will not see this. Anyway, we click upload. It will take some time. Okay, our function has been deployed, and we can also test it here, but I will close this, and you can see here, this is our newly created add customer Lambda function. And on this page, if I refresh this, so this is our new function. Okay, now click on this function, and here we need to add a trigger to invoke this function. So click on add trigger, and because we are going to define an API trigger, so I will select API Gateway, and then I will create a new API because I haven't created yet. Okay, here we have two options, HTTP API and REST API. If it is a very complex function and also involves some other APIs, then you will need to select REST API. But it is a simple function, so I will select HTTP API. And then in the security, I will select open. And in the additional settings, I will name this API as customers-API. And then deployment stage. There could be many stages like development, testing, production, but in this case, I will leave it as it is, and I will click add. So a trigger has been created successfully, and this is our endpoint here. So we copy this, and now let's open Postman. Postman is a tool for API testing. And here I will paste the endpoint, and then in the body, I will select raw and then JSON already selected. And here I will provide the object I'm going to pass to this Lambda function. So customer name, email, contact number, city, and country. And when I click send, I will get the response here. So let's test this. Okay, so here is the response. And if you notice that we haven't passed the customer ID and registration date, we just passed only customer name, email, contact number, city, and country. And in the function, it generated a new ID and the registration date. So this is our response from our Lambda function. And if you notice here, I can use any method to invoke this function. Like before I selected get, and now I'm going to select post and then click send. and I will get the response. Because in our trigger we have not defined the method that this function will use, but now we can define it. And if we go to our API and then here in the routes, you see the method here is any, but we can edit it and we can select post and then save. So now it is post method. So now if I click send button using post method, I will get the response. But if I change the method like get, I will not get anything because this function is now accepting only the post requests. So viewers, this was a demonstration that how we can create our Lambda functions and then we can define triggers and invoke them using an API endpoint, and how we can pass an object to a function and then how can this function return us an object. And hope you like the video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.